I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LM foot pads are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches. That's one small step for. Neil Armstrong is famous for this one moment. But what if the greatest challenges of his life, the moments that really defined him, had nothing to do with the moon? This is the story you haven't heard, about the engineer, the test pilot, and the quiet leader whose true genius was on display when the cameras weren't rolling. We all know Neil Armstrong, the astronaut. But do we know the man who stared death in the face, time and again, and found his greatest strength when no one was watching? The forging of a hero. Neil Armstrong's story doesn't start in a NASA spacecraft. It starts in the skies over Korea. As a young naval aviator, he flew 78 missions. On one of those missions, in September 1951, he was on a low bombing run when his F-9F Panther jet was hit. It wasn't by anti-aircraft fire, but by a cable strung across a valley as a booby trap. The cable sliced right through his wing, shearing off a large section. The plane was crippled, but Armstrong didn't panic. He managed to nurse the jet back over friendly territory before he was forced to eject. He was picked up by a U.S. military jeep, avoiding capture. It was the first of many moments that would forge the man we'd later come to know. It wasn't just luck that saved him, it was an extraordinary calm under pressure, a trait that would become his signature. After the war, Armstrong didn't want a safe career, he wanted a faster one. He became a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base, the place where the sound barrier was broken and pilots were constantly pushing experimental aircraft to their absolute limits. This was the razor's edge of aerospace, and Armstrong was one of its sharpest minds. He flew the most advanced and dangerous aircraft ever built, including the legendary X-15 rocket plane. These weren't just flights, they were 10-minute journeys of controlled violence, dropping from a B-52 and rocketing to the very edge of space before gliding back to Earth. He was a man who lived in a world of complex equations and life or death choices, where your mind was the only thing between a successful flight and a fireball on the desert floor. And for Neil Armstrong, the fire was never far away. Trial by fire. The biggest tests Armstrong faced weren't always at 100,000 feet. In 1962, the cruelest test of his life came not in a cockpit, but at home. His 2-year-old daughter, Karen, whom he nicknamed Muffy, was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. He and his wife Janet did everything they could, but Karen passed away on January 28, 1962, their 6th wedding anniversary. The loss was devastating. Those close to him said he became even more private, burying his grief in the intense complexity of his work. Years later, he said he felt the best way to handle it was to continue with my work, continue things as normal as I could. This quiet stoicism, born from unimaginable heartbreak, became a core part of his character. He was a man who compartmentalized his pain and focused with unwavering intensity on the mission ahead. And the missions kept getting more dangerous. Just a few months later, on April 20, 1962, he was piloting an X-15 when a malfunction caused him to overshoot his landing at Edwards. Instead of re-entering the atmosphere properly, he pulled the nose up too high, and the aircraft essentially bounced along the upper edge of the atmosphere. He shot past his landing zone at Mach 3, sailing merrily by the field, as he later put it. He ended up over the Los Angeles area and had to wrestle the craft into a long, gliding turn back toward the dry lake bed, landing with almost no energy to spare. It was the longest flight in the X-15's history, a record set by accident and survived by pure skill. Then, in 1966, he commanded the Gemini 8 mission. He and his co-pilot performed the first ever docking of 2 vehicles in space, a huge achievement. But moments later, a stuck thruster sent the connected spacecraft into a violent, uncontrollable spin. Tumbling end over end, with the spin rate peaking at roughly 1 revolution per second, the crew was seconds from blacking out. While mission control was still trying to figure out what was wrong, Armstrong, his pulse barely elevated, coolly undocked, diagnosed the problem, and used the re-entry control system to stop the spin, saving both their lives and the mission. But his closest call came right here on Earth. On May 6, 1968, he was flying the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, a terrifying machine nicknamed the Flying Bedstead built to simulate landing on the moon. 5 minutes into the flight, the vehicle went haywire. Leaking propellant caused a complete failure of the flight controls. At just 200 feet above the ground, with the craft in an unrecoverable roll, Armstrong ejected. Engineers later estimated that if he'd ejected just half a second later, his parachute wouldn't have had time to open. The vehicle crashed in a massive fireball. Armstrong, who only bit his tongue, was reportedly back at his desk working within the hour. The quiet triumphed. So when it came time to pick a commander for the first lunar landing, NASA didn't just need a pilot. They needed an engineer. They needed a leader who had been tested by fire and tragedy, a man whose heart rate didn't spike when the alarms were blaring. They needed Neil Armstrong. The Apollo 11 landing on July 20, 1969, is famous for that one step. But the most critical part of the mission happened in the minutes just before, inside the lunar module Eagle. As they came down, program alarms the crew had never seen in simulations started flashing. The guidance computer was overloaded. Even worse, Armstrong looked out his window and saw where the autopilot was taking them, right into a crater the size of a football field, filled with massive boulders. This was the moment his entire life had led to. It wasn't a simulation. With ice in his veins, Armstrong took manual control. While Buzz Aldrin called out the altitude and speed, Armstrong flew the lander like a helicopter, skimming over the boulder field, hunting for a safe spot. In Houston, they were getting nervous. The fuel calls came back, 60 seconds. Then, 30 seconds. Finally, with about 25 seconds of fuel left, Armstrong gently set the Eagle down in the Sea of Tranquility. His first words weren't a triumphant shout, but the calm, professional report of an engineer. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. The world celebrated the man who walked on the moon. But after the parades, Armstrong did something incredible. He walked away. He resigned from NASA in 1971. He was offered high-paying corporate jobs and university presidencies, but he turned them all down. Instead, he bought a farm in Ohio and became a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Cincinnati. For 8 years, he taught both undergraduate and graduate courses, sharing his knowledge not as a celebrity, but as an engineer. His students remember him as a quiet, thorough, and deeply caring professor who just wanted them to understand the material. He was a man who had been to the moon but found his purpose in a quiet classroom, far from the spotlight he never wanted. In the end, Neil Armstrong's story proves that true greatness isn't measured in moments of fame, but in a lifetime of quiet dedication. We remember the one small step, but the man who took it was forged in the skies of Korea, tempered by personal tragedy, and proven in near-fatal tests of skill and nerve. He was so much more than an astronaut. He was the brilliant engineer who saved himself from a spinning capsule in space, the peerless pilot who cheated death over the Mojave Desert, and the humble leader who chose a life of substance over celebrity. His genius wasn't in the famous quote he delivered for the world. It was in the thousands of quiet, focused decisions he made when everything was on the line, decisions that saved his life, his missions, and ultimately, made that one giant leap possible. He showed us that the most important work is often done in silence, and that the most profound legacies are built not on what you say, but on what you do when no one is watching. If you believe the stories of quiet heroes and unsung moments in history deserve to be told, subscribe for more. And let us know in the comments, who is another quiet genius whose story we should tell next. Thanks for watching.